All right. Hello, everybody. This is Dr. AnthonyChaffee. With me today is a good friend of mine, Natalie West, who some may recognize from our recent carnivore versus vegan debate. She was our team captain with the Australian College of Nutritional and Environmental Medicine. Natalie is a 20-year clinical psychologist and has been psychotherapist.
Sorry.
I apologize.
Psychotherapist.
Yeah, psychotherapist who's been treating mental health with diet for the past 15 years and found significant effects and benefits from this. Thank you, Natalie, for coming on.
Thank you, Anthony. Yay! It feels like we're a reunion back again. Yes,
absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you. No, I'm excited to talk about my passion and the connection between what we fuel ourselves with, just not physically in relation to what we put in our mouth, but auditory and also visually. So just to add on what you were saying before, I started, over 15 years ago being trained in clinical psychotherapy and, all different other modalities like clinical hypnosis to really understand and how to help people understand their minds, how their minds work. But also too, I was very, very lucky at that time to be mentored by someone who also was a specialist in psychiatric nutrition. And you could imagine 15 years ago, that was not even on the scale of kind of in the psychological, even the psychotherapy world. So, for me, it was kind of, I felt like I was the floating ship on my own, trying to understand that, anything from a depression or a mental health issue or whatever someone has been labeled with, it's just not always a psychological issue about their own self-image or their own thinking or, their childhood pre-cognitive commitments. The mentor that I had worked with very closely, he said to me, it was very clear. He goes, Natalie, if you want to help people long-term and not just fix one part of the puzzle, you must also look at the connection between gut health and, what people fuel themselves with every day with nutrition. If you don't get that right, you'll never, ever put the whole puzzle together. So for me, it just made sense. But, as I said, back 15 years ago, it was just like, when you ask someone what they eat, they'd look at you really weirdly.
So 15 years ago, what were you guys recommending people eat back then?
So basically, I've followed and did a lot of study in relation to Abram Hoffer, Linus Pauling. I don't know if you've ever heard of them, but they started back the orthomolecular nutrition and orthomolecular medicine back, I'm talking early 1900s, right? This has been around for a long, long time. Yeah. And looking at the modality of, hold on, how are our brains working from a psychology model, our thinking structures and about our own self, but also to what's going on in our gut, because, in the collective community and everyone that you've ever spoken to in your audience will be aware by now that your gut health is such a critical key, well, really the first key to that brain connection. I call it the first brain. So it's like, well, what are we feeding that first brain to then send the right signals and the neurotransmitters to be made to actually make us operate from a psychological model as well, but all together in alignment. So back then, the protocol for anyone that would come with anything like an anxiety or a depression or even high-end disorders such as like schizophrenia and things like that, those kind of things are, a 20-year plus high anxiety disorders, but also too, it's not just a mental disorder, it's also a physiological disorder in relation to the body being inflamed. So back then, the high recommendations were no wheat, no gluten, take out anything that was processed, no junk food, no sugar, no cereals, even porridge, stay away from it. So in effect, and also to high dose vitamin C, checking on your vitamin D. So a lot of that just made sense. So if you got rid of the inflammatory food responses, then at least you would have some space and gaps to understand, hold on, if I'm fueling my depression with both how I feel about myself, but if I'm also fueling myself with sugar and processed foods, how does my body get the nutrients that it needs?
Yeah. That's interesting that they were already, getting away from wheat and things like that. Back then, there's a book that came out called Grain Brain. Uh,
Yes.
yeah, have you read that? Are you familiar with that?
No, I'm not familiar with that
Yeah.
one. I've read Wheat Belly, which
Yeah,
similar.
right. Yeah. And yeah, and again, just talking about these sorts of connections where, it affects your brain, it affects your brain, negatively in a lot of
Yes.
different ways. I mean, even just from just a purely nutritional standpoint, not even from, a toxin standpoint, which these things certainly have and can screw with your body. Your body, people say that your brain primarily runs on glucose. That's actually incorrect. When I was studying biochemistry in my undergraduate degree, it was very clear, the biochemical textbooks stated very clearly that ketones are our brain's
Ketones.
primary energy source. We always run on ketones. We just, run on more ketones when we aren't eating any sort of exogenous carbohydrates. We only run on glucose when we have exogenous carbohydrates. And, and we call this a fed state. So we say this is our primary
Yes.
state. Therefore, this is our primary nutrition source. But obviously, I disagree with that. I don't think that is our primary metabolic state. So ketones, obviously don't need insulin to get forced into your cells. And so when you get peripheral insulin resistance, you can get that in your brain as well.
Correct.
And then if you're in this carbohydrate driven state, you're not going to get energy into your brain because you're insulin resistant. But then you switch over to a ketogenic diet or a carnivore diet, even better, then you bypass that completely. Now you're just running on ketones. You're near exclusively running on ketones. And all of a sudden your brain wakes up. And
it is. You just kind of go, whoop, the lights turned on, and I know experiencing with my own clients that, I get it when people are depressed. I really do. And the last thing that they kind of want to do is kind of pick themselves up to kind of go, well, gosh, I've been in therapy for 10 or 20 years and now I've got to look at what I put in my mouth, and a lot of the people that I've spoken to and worked with for many, many years, they've never been asked that question. Like, tell me what you eat. Tell me what you fuel your brain and body with. Because unfortunately, as a society, food has always been used as a comfort, as a connection to joy, as a connection to feed emotions. And we've lost our intuition as human beings into actually understanding what real food hunger is, as in fuel to drive your body. So anyone that knows us, we've said this so many times, we fuel ourselves to make ourselves work, to make ourselves feel good. I don't use food as a comfort. I don't use food to make me happy. Yeah. As in, if I have a craving, which I don't anymore, I've been over carnivore for 2 years now with my own healing. But again, you lose all of those crazy ruminations of all I think about is eating. All I think about is sugar and carbs. And we need to disrupt that pattern. So that's why it's so, so crucial. One, for people to understand really clearly, you're not broken. There is nothing actually wrong with you. Secondly, you must understand how your conscious mind works, how your unconscious mind works, what your self-image is, what your value systems are, and what your driving of your belief structures and values as a human being. And again, what are you auditory and visually feeding yourself? But secondly, what are you putting in your mouth? And it is very, very, very clear now that what you put in your mouth will affect your mental health. It just is. And, for me, coming from that space such a long time ago, and just like I said, feeling like I was a ship in the night by myself, because really talk about nutritional psychiatry wasn't really on the forefront. But in the last probably 8 years, the people like Dr. Chris Palmer and Dr. Georgia Ede and even Eric Weissman, they are psychiatrists that have basically moved into the nutritional space. And I've also now started to apply myself to a new qualification with nutritional psychiatry, because it's such an important part. But I have to go to the US to do that. I actually have to do that all online, because there's nothing here in Australia that actually covers all of the modalities that I want to cover. And, one of the biggest things is making sure that, protein is not vilified and meat is not vilified in a nutritional psychiatry aspect, because it's one of the most powerful sources of nutrition that we have for our mental health. And I'll just give you an idea. I've had a client of mine, been working with him now for about 6 weeks. 4 months ago, he tried to commit suicide, and he was really, really in a bad way, and found me through another recommendation through Carnivore community. And literally, I actually wrote a little blurb on my Instagram and my Facebook about, he called me on a Saturday and he goes, look, I have to call you today just to let you know. He said, I've never felt so alive and so motivated to be here. And first times when I wake up in the morning, I actually don't have depression and anxiety, which is just phenomenal. So all we did was allow him to understand his patterning and his programming around his own self-image. But then secondly, it's like, what are you fueling yourself with? What are you doing? Again, it's not uncommon for people to have depression and anxiety and anything that makes them feel flat, to feed themselves with carbs, processed foods, because it's fast, it's easy. But also too, when you're in a really, really flat state, it also comes back to self-worth and respect of yourself, to go, hold on, actually, I always have this saying, at the end of my fingertips, I have a lot of control. So I either have to understand what control and where I'm going with that control and how that's fueling me every single day.
Yeah. And so you obviously, you promote more of a carnivore lifestyle now. And have you seen that? How have you seen that? Obviously you started with, getting rid of grains and all these sorts of things. When did you switch over to just a full-on elimination carnivore diet in your practice? And what were the differences you saw in your patients?
So really for me, it was my own journey. So with most of my clients, I'd always valued, getting rid of the processed foods firstly, but then putting in, high quality nutrients, including high fat and protein. But again, there's a whole caveat on vegetables and fructose and things like that as well, and I love what you've said a couple of days ago, no one is ever fructose deficient. So again, this is about making sure that we are relearning and unlearning what we believe or have been told to be true. And the only way that you can do that, Anthony, is actually go, hold on, I'm an individual. Currently what I'm doing, if I'm eating a rainbow diet and I still feel like rubbish, something has to change, right? And as much as we are tribal animals and we want to feel like we're going to fit in, but at the end of the day, I'll always say to people, your mental health must come first, above everything. So with a mental health diet protocol is exactly where we go. Mm-hmm. And so for me, knowing my background, I had no wheat, even no dairy back then. I have that now. I haven't even eaten fruit for 10 years. It's just revoltingly sweet and disgusting. It's just foul. But I think from where I am and where people mainly are, they need that sugar hit. It's that dopamine reaction that they need to feel energy or to feel alive, right? But again, you have the crash, the peaks, the crashes, and then you're down again, and then you're still hunting for more fruit or muffins or Coke or whatever. So for me, it was in lockdown over 2 years ago, and I got lazy, must admit. We all kind of, suffered in lockdown, and I actually started eating sourdough bread, right, with avocado, because I was just locked inside, no work, can't work. Kids are here trying to homeschool, and I kind of lost my mind a little bit. Yeah. So I just thought, I'll be okay. It's been years since I've had sourdough. Yeah, no. So after about 7 days, I woke up and half of my face was numb. Jeez. And I'm like, okay, something's wrong there. Yeah. So, because really that was the only thing that I added back in. Yeah. So I ended up going and having some blood tests done. And my doctor, God love him, don't go there anymore because when he saw my LDL, he's like, oh, okay, you need to go on statins. I'm like, no, that's a whole different story. I'm like, mate, I'm 47, relax. That was 2 years ago. But I had my blood test done and he come back and he said, oh, actually, Natalie, I'm a bit concerned about your fasting insulin. He said, it looks like you're a borderline type 2 diabetic. I'm like, I'm 60 kilos. That's a very interesting concept. And he also had said the neurological reaction was actually from the wheat, because he also said I had a marker for celiac, right? Which I hadn't even realized because I'd been off wheat and gluten for years. So I was just like, okay, sure. Stopped immediately. And I went, okay. And he said, oh, just no, you just keep eating what you're eating. You're fine. We'll just keep an eye on it. I'm like, okay. So telling me I'm nearly borderline type 2 diabetes, obviously I have insulin resistance, because the other thing that I'd also noticed, Anthony, coming from bodybuilding background as well. So I was eating every 3 hours and a range of, because that's what you're told, right? You're told to keep your metabolism up, with carbs and protein, but no red meat back then, and chicken. Chicken's a weak bird. I don't touch chicken anymore. It's disgusting. Beef for me is the only thing that satiates me. But it was my own experience in going, hold on, if I'm doing this and this is getting me that, and I take responsibility of adding the wheat back in. So I took that back out and I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to do some more research. So a little video came up for me with Paul Mason, which he's just a rock star to me. He's just such an amazing human being. And what he's doing in the carnivore community is just brilliant. So for me, I went, interesting. I'm just going to jump in. So literally, because I'm always a very jump in both feet. I'm just like, I just don't stand back and go, oh, I'll just test it out. So I went, right, I'm going full carnivore for 30 days. So I thought, can't die from no carbs, or, because I knew that if you take out carbs, you've got to, refill it with high fat and protein. And literally within 2 weeks, I was just, whoa, what is going on here with this? I had the most energy I'd ever had. My thinking was on point. I lost weight by default, not that I needed to, but I think my body was obviously some inflamed from reintroducing, back the copious amounts of sourdough that I ate. But I just kept going, and that was 2 years ago. So for me, when I talk to even my own mental health's been pretty good, because, I understand how my mind works and understand if I'm going to say something to myself, I know where to pull it up, and I know where it comes from. However, since being zero carbs, so just to let people know, I'm plant-free. I have not touched a vegetable in over 2 years, not dead. Or undernourished. And just live on meat and fat. And for me, with clients, I have some clients that have gone, you know what, I'm done with feeling this way. Let's just go straight into carnivore. So we basically make sure that we're working every weekly session with psychological adjustments, physical craving adjustments, and the adaptation phase that I go through. So I've got 3 adaptation phases, because obviously we know sometimes our guts have got to kind of adapt to the fat, and people are like, well, what's going on with my bowels? So for me, it was a no-brainer. And then I just started introducing more low-carb, ketogenic style ways of eating for people that are really, really struggling with their mental health. And it works. And if anyone doesn't know who Georgia Eden, Dr. Chris Palmer are, you need to listen to these people as well. They are brilliant human beings that have so many studies. And even Rick Weissman, I don't know if you know this, but over 13 years ago, he started a lady who was in her 70s on a ketogenic style diet. And she had severe schizophrenia, who was actually diagnosed at 17. So this lady's 70, by the way, right? So it goes on a ketogenic diet, and within 2 weeks, her hallucinations and her voices in her head disappeared. And then 6 months later, she was off all of her medication.
Wow. That's fantastic. Yeah, I was actually going to ask, I've seen obviously studies with to do with depression and anxiety, and how this can really help, and especially getting up your LDL cholesterol. But I actually Yeah, and so maybe talk a bit about that, but also if you can delve into the psychiatric conditions as well that can be benefited from that, because that was something I was curious about.
Absolutely. So, I guess in the medical world, as it's been such, is to treat the symptom. Okay. So, for example, if someone's presenting with something, then we just treat them with drugs and we treat the symptom, but we don't actually look at the root cause. And one of the, I guess, the biggest hills we've had to push up, and especially people like Dr. Georgia Eden and Chris Palmer, it's trying to prove to the medical industry that you actually can heal your body by feeding it the human, or what we call a species appropriate way of eating, right? So if we even go back as far as the 1970s, like, you look at the increasing cases of obesity, type 2 diabetes, mental health disorders, the rare fact, and the other thing too in the psychological world, Anthony, is the reaction is, oh, you've got a chemical imbalance in your brain, which has been defunct for many, many years. There was a UK, I just lost his name right now, but there's a UK psychologist that actually debunked that many, many years ago, and he actually pretty much was nearly strung and quartered because he went against the psychology model, right? So there's no test to test your brain for what's your serotonin, but your serotonin's made in your gut by now. Most people should know that over 75% of the serotonin that you need as a neurotransmitter is made in your gut. So if you're inflaming that with sugars and processed foods, how do you think your body's going to function? Right. And it's the same with the LDL. There's a lot of papers that basically have said, and actually Chris Palmer also talks about it, is the higher LDL you have, the more that your brain is supported to actually create the right neurotransmitters to actually work correctly. So, we've got the main things are like GABA, dopamine, serotonin, and also norepinephrine, right? So they're all the main things that you need to work together to fire to be able to, for your thinking processes to actually work. And again, if you think about lowering your LDL, I think there was a report you spoke about. People had more high mortalities when they had lower LDL. So fat is your brain. Yeah. You need fat, and fat doesn't make you fat, because otherwise you and I and all the other carnivores in the world will be like obese, right? But I think the struggle is a lot of the time is for people to trust themselves and to trust their bodies and to trust that they have the ability to heal themselves in the support with their individual needs. But you know what? I always say to people, even, who maybe don't eat gluten, okay, for example, but they've got really funky symptoms and they're non-specific, and the doctor said, oh, it's an autoimmune, we don't know what it is, but it causes them pain, but they're dropping down a kale bomb smoothie every morning. And it's just like, well, that actually may not be good for you because it's high in oxalates. And most people long-term, you may feel fine in the beginning, but if you've got funky symptoms and you've carried them around for a while and they're not psychological attachments and they're physically showing up, you've got to look at the things that you believe are healthy for you, but they may not be. Yeah. I'm not componenting everyone go zero carb, because guess what? That may not work for some individuals. However, I think the biggest thing is understanding that depression and anxiety and even long-term schizophrenia, the study is there, the research is there to basically state, if you go on a ketogenic, low carb, high protein, high fat way of life, it's not a diet. I hate that word. Even when we use a carnivore diet, it's like, because most people's mentality is, I've been on diets all my life, but we use diets to lose weight. We've got it all wrong. It's really wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, that's it. People call it a way of eating and just a way of life. A diet denotes a sense of temporality, like this is going to be, we're going to do this so I can fit in my wedding dress or in my high school jeans, and then I'll go back to eating custard. And and then I remember talking to people, the whether a diet was good or not was whether or not when you stop that diet, whether you gain all the weight back or not. And I thought that was so dumb, because people said about Atkins, they say, oh yeah, people lose a lot of weight and they get really healthy. But as soon as you start eating crap again, you gain all the weight back. It's like, well, what did you think was going to happen?
Correct.
It's like I stopped drinking, 10 years ago. I haven't been drunk the whole time, but you know what happened? As soon as I started drinking again, I got drunk. I mean, what the hell is this? What's with this abstinence bullshit? Because as soon as I'm not abstinent, I get drunk again.
Well, and again, it's like I think Chris Palmer was saying there's like a gap between 3 to 5 years. So if you commit to healing your own mental health and in conjunction with psychological support, and I will say it's really rare nowadays to find a doctor that actually will refer someone that can actually support in both elements, because a lot of the time, as we've said too, doctors aren't trained in nutritional from a psychiatrist or even from a, hey, the Wheat Bix and the donuts you're probably eating for breakfast is contributing for you to depression, because we always get told that, depression is a head thing. That's like one piece of the puzzle. And that's why a lot of people will go to therapy and, they'll feel good for a little while, because that's natural to connect and download and dump on people to basically get some skills back. But the minute that you walk out and you go home and you sit on the couch, and then you're fueling your dopamine hits with either Xbox or even porn, and then food, and you order takeaway or KFC arrives, every single step that you've just taken is totally undone with what you've just fueled yourself with.
Yeah. And, something I've touched on before is that, you have people that have like a, genetic predisposition and then the environmental trigger. And if you, don't have the genetic predisposition, then you're not going to get, certain disease. But also if you even are susceptible to that, but you don't get the trigger, you're not going to get it anyway. And also there's just people that, certain toxins are just going to cause, toxicity in certain people, in everyone. Some people to greater or lesser extent. There was a study I remember that came out in 2015. It was a husband and wife researching duo from Canada. They identified something like 56 or 54 genes that were implicated in schizophrenia, and they found that different combinations of these genes, you got the different sorts of schizophrenia, like schizoaffective disorder, and so forth. But again, you get dependent, you get the prevalence of these sorts of diseases, even with people that are susceptible, it's not 100%, so the penetrance is much lower than that. Penetrance being the percentage of people who have a genetic, a gene. Correct. and actually display the disease.
And again too, the mind is extremely powerful, right? So again, I hear it all the time, and even history from my own family, like my mum's had lots of different things mentally happen in her life, but we always hear, well, if that's your parents, and then you're going to get it. But again, it depends on where you are in your own self-image. It's the same thing with, well, if you've got type 2 diabetes in your family, pretty likely you're going to get it. So once you've kind of given someone that information, and it's from a doctor who in effect has authority, right? But we now know that type 2 diabetes can be reversed. It absolutely can. It is a lifestyle choice. And however, if you don't have a great respect for yourself, or you haven't been taught the tools to have self-love and have, how am I contributing to my health today? What am I saying to myself? What am I fueling myself with? But again, we also get sabotaged externally. So I'm sure I also get lots of DMs from people in the carnivore world where they've just said, what, I went carnivore and everyone was, thought I was going to die because I'd given up my Cocoa Pops, but I wanted to eat steak for breakfast. But they've really got to be resilient, because a lot of people will self-sabotage you because of their own reflections of like, whoa, that's so out there, it's so weird. And it's like, well, is it really? This is where we've come from. We've eaten meat and, eaten once when we're hungry, twice maybe. It's not radical. And at the end of the day, if that's helping someone's mental health and they're contributing to that, there is nothing more powerful than that. And that's what I see in my own clients. It's like, I didn't know I could do that. I didn't know that if I ate that and then I felt like shit. And it's like, great, you know what? If someone's done a low carb or even zero carb, even into carnivore way of life, and then they've done that for say 4 or 5 weeks and the light's been turned back on, then they go out and they eat something. And then the next day they're like, oh, I feel like shit.
Yeah.
I'm like, great, excellent. Guess what? You've just given yourself the power to go, this is how I can choose to feel or not.
Yeah. And I certainly noticed that with myself, just physically. Anytime I sort of reintroduce anything, I never reintroduce something completely, but something will slip in. Like maybe something I'm at a restaurant and, I tell them not to put, spices or seasonings or sauces on it, but they do.
Yeah.
And I scrape off as much as I can. And, but then I'm curious. I'm like, okay, well, what is this going to do to me? I always feel, I always tell something, like I'll get like a stuffy nose, or my face will get itchy, or my asthma will kick in. But, I certainly noticed, I've had, bouts of depression or, times that I've just not felt great.
Felt good. Yeah.
Yeah. And I really haven't had that, since going carnivore anytime during that. But I also have noticed that when I reintroduced greens, just like, herbs and seasonings and so forth, I get horrifically depressed, like clinically depressed to the point of actually, contemplating suicide. On one instance, I was morbidly depressed. And I remember thinking, like, this isn't right. Nothing happened today that should make me feel like this, but I do feel like this. It's exactly how I feel. And I realized then that this was a pathological depression state, that something was causing this. This wasn't something in my life that was causing this. It's something that happened. And so
biological, physical reaction.
Yeah, exactly. And so I figured, and I had just eaten, I'd been over at my parents' house and they had just started going carnivore, but my mom hadn't quite gotten the concept of like not using a whole bunch of plants when you cook the meat. So she just slapped on just every herb that she could find. I mean, it was literally green. It was a green crust around.
Oh, wow. It's like a crust of green.
Yeah. And I was like, Mom, you're not supposed to have plants. They have bad things. No. This is just the meat. We're not having any sides. It's just the meat. I'm like, yeah, but there's plants on the meat. You're not supposed to have that. And she just thought it just didn't count because it was on the meat. And it was like, well, yeah, you can, tip cocaine into your coffee and just tell yourself you're just drinking, it's just coffee because it dissolves and you can't see it. But obviously there's something else going on there. But
yeah, it's very true, Anthony. And this is the thing, I think, where, my passion and my message is, everyone that we work with and collectively is, if you go off something and you feel great and you all of a sudden go, hold on, I'll just go back a bit. The other element of human beings, and when we kind of get labeled with something, or we've been depressed or we've been anxious or whatever, we feel really hopeless, right? So we think that it's all something that we've done, or psychological attachments to thoughts, feelings, and reactions. But we get so used to feeling at a certain level, right? So the minute that you open the door for someone to go, actually, hold on, once we get the psychological attachments around your self-image, get you moving from your poor and conflicted self-image to operating from your positive self-image, and then looking at the way you're eating and where you're fueling yourself, people become quite resistant. And the reason being is because our minds love familiarity, even if it's harming us. Okay, so the first default response is your mind is there to protect you at all costs, regardless if you're eating donuts every day. This is what we do, right? So the minute that someone's given that door where you've got one foot in familiarity, where they've been maybe for 10 or 20 years, and they step one foot out into unfamiliarity, and they even get a snippet of, oh, I've woken up today and I actually feel really good. I don't have the rumination. I have energy. I slept really well. And again, with Metabolic Health, and, another person is Ben Bickman. I love him. I think he's amazing. Yeah. Root cause of insulin resistance. But again, Metabolic Health, most people will go, you just need to keep eating so you keep your metabolism up. Like, there's so many layers to metabolic health. It's sleep, it's hormones. And again, you need high LDL for hormones, right? So once we kind of get all of that in a bucket, and people actually go, oh my gosh, actually, I feel so good, but I'm also scared of feeling that way because I've just not had the ability to stay there. And people revert back because it's comfort in food. So again, every single person I know, and I've also worked with a friend of mine who was actually an ex-vegan, basically a practitioner had said to her 8 years ago now, if you don't start eating meat, you're going to die in 3 years.
Wow.
I'm just putting it out there. And she went, fuck, okay. So she went to the butcher's, she got a whole kilo of mince, put it full of butter. And that was even before I had ventured into my carnivore land. And now she is a carnivore. And the one thing she said to me, she's had depression and anxiety as well. She said, I have never felt so free in my head and my body around food. I don't think about food. I eat when I'm hungry. I know if the meat doesn't taste good, I'm not hungry. I'll push it away. I'll wait again until I get the right signal. She said, I know the difference between boredom and my body going, brain, feed me now. I need the fuel. And that's not an uncommon story. And it's the same with alcohol. I wrote an article actually yesterday on alcohol, and obviously it's sugar, we know that. But the attachment to so many people DM'd me that have been carnivores and said, stop drinking the minute I was a carnivore. Anxiety and depression disappeared. I'm like, yay. Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah, that's the funny thing about metabolism as well. You say this is the recommendation: you have to keep eating to keep your metabolism up. Insulin suppresses your metabolism. So like, what are you doing? Yeah, you're constantly keeping your insulin raised constantly.
Right.
That is suppressing your metabolism. So I mean, it's completely backwards, and so you backwards. And so you get completely backwards results. Like it's but it's so locked in. Like you say, there's so many paradigms in just health and nutrition and fitness and so forth. It's just, this is the way it is. And people just do, there's so many people I talk to that do, fitness and fitness competitions and so forth. And I see everything they're doing. They're like, wow, that's really great. I'm really interested. I've tried this for, a couple of weeks and I felt fantastic, but I've got a competition up. And so I have to go back to the tried and true sort of methods. And it's just like, okay, if you want to keep getting the same results and keep doing the same thing, by all means. But but people are so trapped into that. They can see this like, wow, this not only makes sense intellectually, but it's improved my life and my training and my results. But I'm not going to do it because I'm scared to sort of go away from that. But there are people breaking away from that, thankfully, and they're having fantastic results.
Yeah, but again, we've got to go back to like, what is metabolic health for each individual person, right? So again, the 90% to basically make sure that we're understanding our physiological, psychological feedback that we're giving ourselves. 90% of that comes from what we put in here. Like it's non-negotiable. And the fact that, Dr. Westman has so many studies, even Dr. Andrew Sewell, who's an orthomolecular specialist out of the US, has used high doses of niacin, really low carb way of eating, and literally has reversed any kind of massive, bipolar disorders. Even Amber O'Hearn, right? She was told, I think she had, now don't quote me, I think it was bipolar 2. And she was told that she would never get rid of her condition. And she'd been on antidepressants, I think, for around 12 years, being quite young. So she went carnivore and went into remission. And she's not ever looked back. And same with Emily Purton. Emily Purton, I think, was in and out of psych wards. She went carnivore, and even her psychiatrist was like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
The evidence is there. But again, I think, Anthony, the uphill battle that we have is, it's not dangerous. It's not going to kill you to take out for the moment. You need to have that elimination process to actually start feeling what you're capable of and what your brain is actually capable of doing. It's a step-by-step process. It's, as I said, it's staying in familiarity, but just starting to step out of into unfamiliarity and getting out of that comfort zone of, hold on, if I've been doing the rainbow diet and eating every 3 hours and eating, mixed vegetables, and if something's not working, and your mental health is not getting better, regardless of the amount of antidepressants or, anxiety medication that you're on, maybe just open your mind a little and just start. Like myself, I jumped both feet into carnivore and haven't looked back, but that's just me. But some people just need a little bit of movement to help. But again, I've had other clients that have gone, no, I don't want to just muck around, just let's get it done. And it's worked really well for them. And then again, like we said, I cheekily went out too, and there was a mushroom on my plate. And I used to love mushrooms in my past life, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, let me just try it. It's been 2 years. I'm sure it'll be fine. Oh my God. It was the most bitterest, disgustingest thing I've ever had in my mouth. But this is the thing, isn't it? It's like, even my daughter, like she's 12, she's pretty much 90% carnivore. And the level of her groundedness and her moods and, going through puberty, worlds apart.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So are there, yeah, that is, especially when kids are so, they can be unhinged during puberty and so forth. And it's very, very hard time for them to go through these serious hormonal transitions. They're trying to, see how this fits in a social spectrum as well. And it's very hard. It's very hard to figure out on the fly. And so, the last thing you want to do is do something to spoil your mental health and make it even harder. Like that sounds awful. And I think,
absolutely.
And I think a lot of people do have to deal with that. Are there specific studies looking at these psychological and psychiatric sort of issues, such as bipolar and schizophrenia, to do with diet? And what are the specific sort of diets that they look at in these?
Yeah, so basically, I'll give you all the links for people to read. So literally, it is, pulling away the carbs, processed junk foods, getting rid of anything that basically is fake, not food-like substances, and fueling the body with fat, medium protein, and just keep going and just literally adjust it as they go along. So a lot of the studies that Chris Palmer has done is literally that, like, high-end psychiatric disorders such as schizophrenia and, to the point where it's like hallucinations, voices in the ears. And I think he was also saying at one last resort, he was just like, you know what? This patient of his was actually obese. And he's like, let's just focus on getting your weight down, right? So he put him on a ketogenic, low carb way of eating. And literally he said everything in his mind started to change. So he actually ended up coming off his meds as well. And his voice has disappeared in his head within about 4 weeks. So Chris, as a psychiatrist, was like, what is going on here? Like, we used it as a weight loss method, but then secondly, it went through and it basically, it's inflammation in the brain. And, I've written an article myself on the fact that depression and anything like that is it's inflammation. And I think we've got enough evidence now. And even, if you go to Rivero, which is, ex-Meat Rex, which is Sean Baker's site, if you go to mental health, depression, anxiety, there is thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of people. As you get DM'd, I get DM'd. Now, people aren't just going to say, you know what, I went carnivore or low carb and I lost all my depression and anxiety. Like, there's no justification for people to want to say that unless they have. But I think the biggest thing, and again with Georgia Ede has got some amazing studies on, again, plant oxalates, taking out plants. Histamine is an issue as well for some people. So some people, for example, may freeze their meat and then cook it, and that obviously can raise the histamine in the meat. So, again, every single person must be looked at as an individual because everyone is unique. But ultimately, as a human and a species appropriate way of eating, we do need fat, and we do need quality sources of fat, and we do need protein. Now, as we know, meat has the 9 perfect amino acids in it. Now, that's not by accident, is it? And it's the satiety of the process. So, when you're fueling yourself with carbs, it's zero satiety. And you're literally, your insulin is going up and down all day. And then you're just hunting and, you get anxious if you can't eat, you get hangry. That's your body telling you you're not fueling it correctly. the minute you have eggs for breakfast, literally people say to me, I haven't eaten for 5 hours and I feel really good. I'm like, I know, that's what happens. You don't need to eat all day, every day. This is what we've got ourselves into. The health epidemic that we're in. Like this is it's not getting better. And it's not because there's not a lack of drugs or there's no new drugs on the market, you know.
Yeah, certainly not.
We are lacking nutrients. We are lacking nutrition. And again, you know, I don't take things in relation to, like, if you look at a plant and you go, okay, well, what nutrition is in that plant? What soil is it grown in? What's it been sprayed with? And as we know, if anyone's seen Chris the Ground, amazing documentary on the level of soil health. Like if your soil has no health, those vegetables you're eating, you might as well just look at them, because they're not going to give you any nutrients whatsoever.
Yeah. The course you're doing in America, are they, you know, because obviously there are a lot of there's a big push for, you know, plant-based everything in the world, and is it what sort of diet metrics are they espousing?
So it's actually a part of the Colorado Medical School. So they have a faculty called the Institute of Nutritional Psychiatry. So when I actually went through the actual modules, there was actually a module which I was specifically looking for whether it was driven to plant-based. And they have a section on understanding the deficiencies of vegan diets. So also,
Pretty often good start. Yeah.
Absolutely, but also too very, very aware of protein health. And I know Chris Palmer talks about it too, because Harvard have a very kind of mixed skewed, very plant-based people, but also too they've just done a study on carnivore diet. So, you know, I think we're shifting, but again, you know, if I'm sitting with someone and they've had depression or anxiety, or they just feel really bad about themselves and they're not eating meat and they're feeling like, you know, really, really low in energy and even, you know, hormonally or sex hormones, all of that kind of thing, and they're eating high amount of plants, well, we've just got to be open and go, hold on, let's just look at something else. Because yes, at the end of the day, if there's a belief structure around it, we have to manage that. But your mental health and how you get up every day, if you're going to hold dogma to a belief structure that's not serving you, we really need to understand why. And, you know, popping a couple of pills every day to just treat the symptoms is not a long-term space for people to live in. Well, I believe.
Yeah, I agree. You know, and I, you know, talk to people, obviously people go vegan for, you know, a multitude of different reasons, but you know, some of it is due to environment and ethical sort of concerns for the animals and so forth, which is fair enough. I mean, I think these are very important things that we should absolutely look into. I think if you scratch the surface, you'll see that you're doing much more good by going on a meat-based, animal-based diet, because this is actually, you know, animals actually help the environment. They don't harm the environment. They're part of the ecosystem, funny enough. Yeah. And you know, you actually have to kill a lot more animals to grow crops than you do just, you know, by raising livestock. And so it's sort of contrary to everything we've been told and what looks right on the surface. But when you actually dig into it and look at the reality of it, it's very different. But you know, some people say that, well, it's good enough. A vegan diet is good enough, and you can, with supplementation, you know, you can get an equivalence, you know, equivalency with, you know, a meat-based diet. And because we do have supplements now, then that's fine. And then, so because these things are equal now, you know, the environmental and the, you know, ethical concerns outweigh the other side. But I don't, I would like to hear your thoughts. You think this is equivocal? Do you think that just being on a vegan diet and then having, you know, having supplements to fill in the myriad of gaps that there are in the nutritional supply from a vegan diet, is that equivocal? Is that good enough?
Well, just using my own, you know, client history, I've not met one vegan that has not needed help, and they've come to me because of that reason, because of their depression, their anxiety. And really, again, it comes back to questioning those belief structures. So again, supplementation, for me personally, I think if you're supplementing on a diet, that means your diet is not full. It's not adequately enough for your body to gain what it needs to gain.
Mm-hmm.
Now, again, most of them are synthetic, unless you go and buy a practitioner one, which one, say an activated vitamin B might cost you $60 a bottle, right?
Mm-hmm.
But again, they're made in a factory. Okay. So again, it's kind of opposing views of, let's look at the environment and let's blame the cows and their belches for the methane. However, the carbon cycle of the methane, we need that to pull it back into the soil. And there's a whole carbon cycle that we need to maintain, that cycle of water into the ground to maintain the soil, and, the cow poop into the soil for the microbes. And there is enough people out there, investigative journalists, that are actually, as you said, scratching beneath the surface to say, well, hold on, no, it's actually not the cow, it's the how and where the cow is. So, we've talked about regenerative agriculture, yes, and feedlots again, people are understanding that education needs to come back to moving things away from feedlots. But again, if you listen to Rich Roll, and I have such high respect for this man. Yes, he is a vegan, and he seems to be flourishing and loving life. Great. If I hear someone that's doing that and they're mentally and physically on point, great. But you know what? Mentally, a lot of the time, they're not on point. But again, it's about the level of on point that they wish to be based on attached to their belief structures. So, he was also saying, and interviewed a farmer who's actually a cow farmer, but also a crop farmer. And he said that just to build an avocado farm, over 100,000 animals die, and they starve to death, and their habitats get destroyed. And even Rich Roll said himself, he said, if you're eating a vegan way and you believe that you're saving animals, you're delusional. He said, because there is death in every process. Yeah. But the fact of the matter is that you see a cow and you hear a cow, and, it's lights out for a cow pretty quickly, But again, I actually grew up on a farm as a kid. So this is another thing that I'm really passionate about. I know what farmers do with their cows. I've seen it. I've seen how they're killed, and it's not suffering, and they're out within, a millisecond. Whereas if you think about crop growing, those animals are destroyed. Like, they have to run for their life, and then the whole habitats are actually destroyed. But at the end of the day, I will always, always come back to the fact you're a human being living your life every single day. How do you choose and how do you want to feel is up to you. Mm-hmm. So, but again, I'm very, very, when people are kind of blaming the cows and they're destroying the planet, I'm like, it's just not true. The cow on the EPA in the US, it's like 3.4% yearly, but then we're talking about making fake meat in factories. Hold on, let's look at the fossil fuel that's going to create, and all the other extra supplements that are made. I think you'll always find a belief or an outcome for what you want, right? But I think unless you really open your mind and go, hold on, is this really, really the correct information? So if you want to remove animals from your diet because you believe they're suffering, well, again, you've just got to be really mindful of the fact that if you're still eating plants, animals still suffer.
Yeah. And, also, like you were saying previously, a lot of these dietary changes that you guys put people through for their mental health is eliminating food sources, food sources. It's not sort of getting them adequate nutrition. So the idea that, that it's good enough to get enough nutrition, basic nutrition, is sort of, shown to not be the case there, because it's these other things that are in plants that cause inflammation, that cause different sorts of, dysregulation in your body, that are then causing these psychiatric issues and
absorption. We know spinach blocks absorption. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And
you
so,
could drink spinach all day long, but it's like, it's blocking everything else from absorbing. And actually, one of the other things that I've just really important, especially with women, is heme iron. Especially for young girls going through puberty, you need heme iron, and I don't mean in a form of an iron tablet. Like it's supplementing things that are natural. But again, where are all your amino acids coming from for that mental health? You just can't get it from a soul-based plant diet.
No, yeah, I would definitely agree. So as far as your patients, what's your sort of clientele that you generally see? Is it mostly patients with depression, anxiety, or are you seeing other sorts of things as well? And how are things going with the dietary changes and so forth?
Yeah, so a myriad of different reasons for people reaching out to me. A lot of the time it's just through referral or just, looking at my content online. So it can be very varied from, relationship issues, but a lot of the people will come to me for external issues, okay, because this is how our minds work. We go external. So I've got relationship issues, I've got work issues, I've got lifestyle issues, I've got depression, I've got anxiety, right? So we've got to bring that back into our own self-image and understanding how we operate in the relationship with ourselves. So if we get all that in alignment and we get all that healed, everything else outside becomes irrelevant, because the boundaries and the values that you have, especially around food, and when you actually decide to make a decision with your diet, as I said, family and friends are going to ruffle feathers, but you've got to be in a space to go, you know what, this is about me and this is about my mental health. So when we go through the protocol, it literally is finding out where you're at, both physically and mentally. Someone's really exhausted and they just drag themselves out of bed every day, we're going to have to go a little bit more gentle. But the most powerful thing that I find for the first 2 hours when I meet people is generally people just don't know how they work. They don't understand why they do what they do. They think they're broken. They think that there's something wrong with them. So if we can kind of get rid of that in the first 2 hours and give them some tools and strategies to understand why they're doing what they're doing. And then secondly, unlock that door to explain, if you eat this way, this is what's going to keep perpetuating.
Yeah.
Give them the information. But it's even funny, like I had a client, now this has popped into my head, like she was ketogenic for years and then went off it and a depression came back. Oh. So it's like, well, great learning, but where do you want to go with that? Be empowered with it. Same with alcohol. If you go off alcohol and then you feel depressed for 4 days later, what people tend to do, if they've worked with me, they go, hold on. It's not me being depressed in my head. It's my body that's depressed. And that's the other thing. People's bodies are depressed. Their cells are depressed. Yeah. Their cells are anxious, because if you're feeding yourself sugar, and this is funny too, a lot of people will say, oh no, I don't need a lot of sugar. And I get them to write out, it's literally 100% sugar. That's all they eat. Yeah. Hidden in the context of, oh, I'll have Special K, or I'll have Sultana brand, or I'll have cholesterol reducing wheat Bix.
Yeah.
It frightens me. It's like, oh my God, that's not food.
No.
So it generally is people have reached an end point and they're like, I just need something else. I've been in therapy sometimes for 10 or 20 years and they've never been asked, what do you eat?
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good point too, is that some people can be in therapy for so long and they really don't, I mean, they're being helped to sort of sustain and maybe maintain or show some improvements, but you would hope that after 15 years, someone would come to a resolution of some kind. If I, as a doctor or any sort of doctor, came in and said, okay, well, you have a cold, you're going to need to see me twice a week for the next 30 years. Yeah. People would probably go find another doctor, but we don't think of it that way with mental health, because it's obviously a different thing. It's much more complicated, but you can wonder, if this is providing as much benefit as it could, if people have to perpetuate it for 20 years. You would hope that they get to a point that they could not need it anymore and just live a normal life.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, unfortunately, our programming is, we must take self-responsibility. So for example, if you've given it an option, we've never been given it for 20 years, and then you start to open that door and, try a zero carb or a ketogenic diet, and actually allow your body to heal instead of trying to force it to do things like lose weight, because that's what most people want. It's like, no, just calm down. That's a side effect of you healing your head and your gut and your body. But humans are being so disempowered, Anthony, I believe, is the fact that, even type 2 diabetics are told to eat carbohydrates and it's okay, and
crazy to me. That's just crazy. Yeah.
That's crazy to me. And, don't know if your audience know, but Dr. James Muke, who was Australian of the Year, he is such an advocate of type 2 diabetes reversal. And, we're actually got an event with him in Sydney. So I'm speaking and my business partner is speaking, and, James is coming up, and we're literally talking about, especially specifically type 2 diabetes and men's health, because men also too don't look after your health very well. Yeah. Women are very different, but, I think from a mechanism of understanding, when you go into a doctor's office and you're like, what, I think I was going to try, a ketogenic or a carnivore diet. And the minute you're poo-pooed, like, nope, that's dangerous, don't do that. You're totally disempowering that person to go, what, I'm going to find the support that I need to help me help myself. But again, it comes back to compliance as well. It's like you can support someone as much as you can, but it's just that window. And I find once they've got over that hump of the first 2 weeks, because people go through pretty much a detox, and you will go through a detox, but you've also got to remember that you've eaten your way into that. Yeah. So then you've got to be responsible of eating your way out of it.
Yeah.
And cravings are okay. You just don't have to listen to them and act on them, because you're not going to die from the craving if you ignore it. But again, I say to clients, if you've got a massive craving because you're normally about 4 o'clock and it's like, where's the muffin? Get some high salt electrolytes. You just drink that down. And again, sodium will also cut out any cravings. But it's compliance. It's actually allowing the person to go, what, I'm actually capable of doing this. And empowering the person to go, you have every single thing that you need, but you've just got to trust yourself and trust the science, trust the data. I give them so much information. I'm like, watch that, read that, and listen to your intuition.
Yeah. Well,
and go to sites like Rivero. Go to,
absolutely.
You can't deny that.
Yeah, no. And I think Rivero's a very good place for people to go as well. Dr. Baker's been doing, yeoman's work for quite some time now, and getting a lot of people involved to get the resources available for people to go there and just get better on their own, which is great. Natalie, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. How do people find you? How do they get a hold of you?
So through my Instagram, my website, and Facebook. So it's just Natalie E West, but I'll send you the link. So if anyone wants to come and have a chat with me. So what I'll normally do is we just book in a half an hour chat. If anything that's resonated with you and you kind of want to explore that journey of connecting, nutrition with mental health and just how you can actually heal yourself and in support, just reach out. And if you want to actually get any information about the Sydney event for any Sydney people, let me know.
Awesome. Well, great. Well, I encourage everyone to go and find Natalie on Instagram. And if you have any sort of mental health issues, please don't try to do this on your own. There's help out there, and Natalie is someone who can help. So if you need to reach out, please reach out. Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Oh.